Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time, the Wheel of Jobs decide that we play Machinist on a Monday evening. And unlike past Machinist experiences, this one actually is fully free of guild tests. For Duty 1, we went to Amdapor Keep Hard, which is one of those optional dungeons with bosses just weird enough that you probably don't get it right the first time or overlook something important. In fact, I'd argue this was definitely not my best showing. The first boss marks a random player with a rather unique looking marker, and a few seconds later, tether to them, dealing a surprising amount of damage while stacking debuffs on them. To avoid it, you have to hide behind one of the statues to make them take the hits instead. There's plenty of statues, so unless things go incredibly sideways, the fact the statues gradually break will not matter. However, an important detail to keep in mind is that if you step away from the statue before the tether finishes fully, it will simply switch back to you. The boss will also sometimes target a random player with a charging attack, and as far as I can see, hiding behind a statue for this does nothing, aside from guaranteeing that the statue fully breaks. Anyway, as is evident from the footage, I goofed up everything that targeted me here. In fairness, everything targeted me, but that's besides the point. The final boss also has a few mechanics to watch out for. In particular, it will goop up party members every so often that needs help to be freed. On my end, I had a tendency to miss that they needed help, so I often came in late with the assist, which is definitely not intentional on my part. Another thing to watch out for is that the boss will throw spinning scythes at players, and the fact it does some upfront damage when it does so can sometimes make you miss the fact that a scythe is continuously spinning on you, doing more damage. Now, despite all of this, we still managed to get through the duty just fine. Still, it is only fair that I point out when I mess things up if I'm going to mention it when others do it. For Duty 2, we went to Sohr Khai. A quick tip about the fan mob before the first boss is that when it dies, it leaves behind a whirlwind that, when stepped into, does some damage to you, but also sends you forward to the next pack, if you didn't already pull it of course, and also gives you an attack speed boost, reducing your GCD. Another random tip I realized while I was here is the fact that while the first boss summons 2 waves of adds, only the first one you actually have to fight, as they make the boss invulnerable. The second wave does not. Now, in regards to the duty itself, I got the impression the tank might have been somewhat undergeared, if not outright inexperienced, as many times throughout the duty, I would grab aggro on something they should definitely be able to hold. Not that it caused any major issues, but I was mildly concerned that the healer got annoyed at me for taking all this damage. Speaking of which, the second boss has some slightly odd mechanics. First, some of its mechanics will damage the side walls, revealing a pool of lightning on the sides of the arena. Every so often, the boss will perform a charge through the middle of the arena, which shows up as a telegraphed attack that may make you feel inclined to step out in the lightning pool. However, the intended solution is to simply hug a still existing wall so that when it dashes across, you just get shoved up against the wall, rather than taking a dot. Now, right as this boss was finishing up, I accidentally dipped my toe into the lightning pool, and while I barely survived it, I didn't get the impression the healer realized I was in the danger zone, as I died from unavoidable damage right after. The previously mentioned aggro issues also led to me taking a tank buster on the final boss, which fortunately did not kill me. For Duty 3, we went to Smileton. Each of the bosses have a strong focus on one specific mechanic that other things overlap with, so let's talk a bit about those. The first boss has this thing with the faces on the side. Simply put, make sure you don't get hit by the same color face twice in a row. And take note of where you land when the knockbacks overlap with the faces shooting. Also, keep in mind that standing between 2 rows is certain death. The second boss does this thing with AoEing a certain area of the arena and then making clones. These clones effectively make 2 of the 4 quadrants dangerous, so you move accordingly. Typically, both of these bosses die before the mix-ups get too crazy. Now, just as we're about to do the last AoE pull before the last boss, the healer needs to go AFK, so we end up doing the pull without the healer, as our tank mentions after the pull, they didn't notice. Oh well, while it gets a bit close, we do make it through. The final boss has this gimmick with sending one bomb to the front and one to the back. Throughout the battle, there's only one specific point where the overlap with other mechanics can force melees out of range to avoid being hit. And that specific combo can sort of be cheesed. The first time the boss puts down persistent mines on the field, it will always make sure other mechanics will avoid the other half of melee range. So there, simply dodge the mine until the boss forcibly explodes it. The second time, however, the boss may choose to strike in such a way that the front mine gets in the way. Being hit by the mine's explosion applies paralysis, if it does damage, so simply face planting into it may not be preferable. However, a warrior using Shake It Off and Bloodwetting, maybe with Vengeance or something on top, can take it without taking damage. A paladin or gunbreaker can use their invuln, and a dark knight can probably get away with just TBN and a little bit of mitigation. Just square up and grab the mine. Make sure other players stepped away in advance so they don't get hit by the bigger explosion though. In this group, our paladin couldn't do much since they had spent their invuln and most other cooldowns on the AoE pool prior. For duty 4, we went to P7N, Agdistis, and Taldamar's here. My opener here is vaguely reminiscent of what it is meant to be at max level. However, something that I think is worth talking about here for Machinist is that when looking into playing Machinist optimally, the optimal rotations can get very specific. This comes down to the fact that making sure everything lines up just right can take quite a lot of planning ahead. However, doing this kind of perfect rotation does not really lead to as much of a payoff if your party is not coordinating raid buffs anyway. Just as an example, over the course of this fight, all 3 raid buffs we do have tended to drift apart. However, what really matters is that to get most of the value out of Machinist, simply make sure you keep the damage cooldowns on cooldown, and whenever nothing is coming up in the next 8 to 10 seconds or so, you can send a hypercharge. If you get a raid buff and have the gauge for Automaton Queen, go for it. Optimally, you'd want the queen to be at 100 gauge, but if you can't plan it in advance, a smaller queen with buffs is better than a bigger one without any, as you will get another queen again later anyway. The one point where things get really complicated is if, for whatever reason, Wildfire comes off cooldown such that you have to choose between a tool or wildfiring on time. In casual content like this, it is far more likely that delaying a tool will cost you a cast of it, than delaying Wildfire slightly will cost you a use of Wildfire. For my part in this run, I definitely drifted Drill a few times throughout. My best explanation is that I'm probably used to it having 2 charges, like it does at max level. For duty 5, we went to Ultima Weapon Extreme, and Taldamar's here again. On our first attempt, things suddenly go sideways just before the last wave of Orbs, which makes us very underprepared for taking the Orbs, which then promptly wipes us. To be clear, this fight has a lot of chaos in it, but only the tank switch mechanic and the Orbs, and of course a Hardened Rage, are certain death. Pretty much everything else you can heal through and keep going somehow. Now, we do make it through on our second attempt, with having gone over the fact that you sort of need 2 players near an orb to be certain to live it, unless you're a tank. However, during our conversation about the orbs, the idea that the orbs could be soaked by a tank invuln came up, and I'll take this one on me, I remembered it wrong. I suggested that, indeed, you can invuln the orbs, as I was certain I had used this fact when we 2-manned this fight synced back in Endwalker, with 2 gunbreakers. However, one of our tanks, FD here, said that no you can't. In fact, they were so confident that they demonstrated as much in our second attempt, dying for it. That's my bad, of course, so take it from me, you cannot invuln the orbs on Ultima Weapon Extreme. However, 2 gunbreakers can duo this fight synced, so enjoy that fact. As mentioned, we managed to get through somewhat nicely on this second attempt. For duty 6, hilariously, we went to Porta Decumana, and Leo the Paladin knew me. Hello! In this party, the White Mage definitely stood out a bit. Either they were very inexperienced, or afraid, both totally fair. Whenever anyone dropped below a certain HP threshold, they spammed Medica 2 specifically to get the party up again. They also made some use of Cure 1. However, they were attacking, which is a big plus. But it is unfortunate, since I'm sure just using Cure 2 instead of 1 would have been a big upgrade already. And most of the time when they spammed Medica 2, maybe just one Medica 2 and waiting for the heart to do its thing would have been just fine. But again, they were attacking, so I'm sure improvements are coming on slowly. Aside from this, the duty went just fine. For duty 7, we went to the second trial of Endwalker, which is rather spoilery, so if you don't want to see that, jump to this timestamp here. That said, I was a 9-minute replacement in the Mother Crystal. Apparently, there were multiple that left. I wonder how badly that first pull went. We may never know. However, this run went very well. In fact, relative to last time I landed in this specific trial in this series, this run had a total of 2 deaths and took about 2/3 of the time the other run took. Things were very smooth. For duty 8, we went to Matoya's Relict as a 3-minute replacement, and Henate the Gunbreaker, who was also a replacement, knew me. Hello! I am almost confident that Dancer was a first timer for this dungeon, as they had a little bit of trouble with the unique mechanics of, at the very least, the first boss, if not every boss. They might also just not remember. On the first boss, there was a bit of trouble with landing the mud balls in the sinkholes, for example. Also, a very random observation. But I'm pretty sure last time I got Matoya's Relict in Mentor Roulette was also as Machinist. It is quite funny how, due to Flamethrower having been buffed so much, is so insanely strong relative to your other AoE options in this specific level range. Make sure to use Flamethrower a bunch here. Also, a very quick tip for the final boss, especially for melee jobs, is that this whole running away phase takes about 20 seconds, so if you make use of the pulling force at the end, you can make your run back faster. For duty 9, we went to M6N, Sugar Riot, and while overall the duty goes alright, I am reminded that it's been a while since I played level 100 Machinist in a proper duty. Now, the fight goes somewhat as expected with a death here and there, but nothing out of the ordinary, until 20%, where both healers suddenly go down to the large thundercloud. As we have no summoner or red mage, this puts the party on a timer, and all mitigation must be optimized right now. A raid wight comes in, and I use Dismantle for it. There's also a reprisal, and our Pictomancer has Tempera Coat. A tank buster is also reduced by this mitigation. While the boss is distracted with avoidable mechanics, we get her down to 12% HP, although our Dancer and Pictomancer each take a Vuln stack. And that is when the multi-stack appears. With 2 players dead, and 2 more with low HP and Vuln stacks, even with some mitigation, this is not going to work. Our Gunbreaker sends a limit break, making it easily survivable. Then Sugar Riot circles back to bridge phase again, and brings out the fire circles again. In hindsight, I should simply have let the Pictomancer go down alone, as the 2 of us would only have worked if we were both healthy. Thankfully, our warrior used Nascent Flash to help me back up, as otherwise I would go down to the lightning spreads. Not only that, but our Gunbreaker also gave me Heart of Corundum. A final raid wight comes out, barely missing the kill on our Black Mage and Dancer, but in return, we take down Sugar Riot. An excellent save by our tanks. And finally, for duty 10, we went to Susano Normal. Not that much special happens here, aside from the fact that, well, it is Susano. During the intermission, one of our healers bravely jumps in front of the sword, and almost dies as a result. Then, for the transition afterwards, one of our tanks decides they don't need to dodge the center slash, and dies for it. A quick tip for the jail mechanic: if you are the player being jailed, remember that you can mark things while you're locked in. While everyone else are focused on the rotations and possibly other stuff happening, you can't move anyway, so simply use 100% of your focus on keeping track of which rock contains you, and then mark it once they become targetable. Help your team help you. A pretty interesting set, with some more challenging non-extreme duties as well. I'm just glad I wasn't cursed with any guild hests this time around. Remember that time where I got like 27 of them? That was also with Machinist after all. And this was also the set where we passed 800 cleared Mentor Roulettes. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, originally, Machinist's Chainsaw in PvP back in Endwalker, when analyzed, had a small chance of straight up one-shotting players. This was not a bug, this was flat out a legitimate 3% chance to deal 100%, later 95% of target's HP. Remember, Chainsaw is a line AoE, so sometimes you could just win a fight on random luck.